What's up YouTube? Welcome back to another review. So, about a year ago, I reviewed the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, I am not a console review or a gaming channel. I'm a model kit channel, but I do like to review stuff, so I wanted to review another Nintendo console. Now, this is the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, the sun has drastically gone down. I've just finished the SS United States model kit review, so it's gotten very dark and gloomy here, so I decided to pop on the light. But the only trouble is that you can see my shadow sort of hovering around. But that shouldn't take away from the review too much. So this is the Nintendo 64. It's a beautiful looking console. Now the thing is with the Nintendo 64, it came out in 1992, but check this out. This thing is heavy. Now, I don't mean like heavy. The Nintendo Entertainment System is heavy, but it's so well built. Like, I can't even get over it, considering it's small. Now, I have ridiculously small hands, so yeah, it's pretty small. Unlike the Nintendo Entertainment System, I reviewed the toaster model, as some people call it. This is the top loader model, and well, there is only top loaders on the Nintendo 64 as far as I'm aware. I love this design, to be honest. It's so handy just popping a game in, because the thing is with the Nintendo Entertainment System, the cartridge contacts get worn down over time because of the spring mechanism. That's not really a problem with the Nintendo 64. It has an attachment here that you can install memory to, because Nintendo 64 games are incredibly underpowered. I don't have the memory, I just have the default bank. Your power switches here, you just push them up and down. This reset button is a pressing button, and it has 4 controller ports. Now, the only game that I know of that has 4-player mode is Super Smash Bros. And I think Mario Tennis. I don't have any of those games, so yeah. They're super handy though, because, unless you're playing multiple people, of course. The underside of the console doesn't have any rubber pads, and well, it does have 2 there, but that's not really necessary. It just sits relatively well. Of course, this is where what would once be an expansion port. Of course, mine is a PAL console. I live in Europe. Now, I mentioned with the Nintendo Entertainment System that I play NTSC consoles in the PAL region. Now, you can absolutely do that with the Nintendo 64, but it's not really that big of a requirement. The Nintendo 64 games are really not that different in the PAL region. They just run slightly slower, but unless you're an advocate or a hardcore Nintendo 64 player, which I am far from one of them, it's really not that noticeable. So you have your AV support. It can also take RF, but I would highly suggest you use an AV cable with this console, and the power supply socket. Now, usually in my reviews, I review not just the console, and I don't really review the games, but I mainly just talk about some of the, because this is a vintage console, right? So, how do you play this console in the modern days? Well, and how well does it hold up in the modern times? So, the Nintendo 64 holds up very well. In fact, it's very rare to find a broken Nintendo 64. And the parts that do break, like for example, the contact pins here, they tend to wear down over time. Easily replaced, not too big of an issue. The console itself costs about £50. If you just buy the console alone, you can get it for about £20. It's super, super cheap. At least via eBay, where I live. And to be honest with you, the console is very fairly priced. The games, on the other hand, not so much at all. Now, this is an issue with the Nintendo Entertainment. I'd say it's an issue with most vintage consoles. But with the Nintendo 64, the issue is quite troubling, to be honest. The Nintendo 64 console is honestly cheaper than the cheapest Nintendo 64 video game. And I mean that I'm not understating that fact. Now, prices will vary from region to region. Obviously, the PAL regions generally aren't worth as much as the NTSC regions. I don't know how many of my viewers are from the US, but like I say, if you're not worried about game speed or you're not worried about any of that, just get a PAL region console. It's fine. They're not much different. If you do live in Europe, I mentioned this with the Nintendo. I'm going to keep referring to the Nintendo Entertainment System review, but I did say this a lot because I am using a Canadian system in the UK or the United Kingdom region. This is a PAL power supply for the Nintendo 64. There's the specifications that are upside down. Okay, try focus. There we go. So a little bit different, but the thing is, if you want to run a NTSC or even a Japanese console in the European region, just get a European power supply and plug it into the NTSC console. It will work the same. It won't damn. You might get some minor overheating issues. I have that on my Nintendo Entertainment System, but it's really not an issue. Like, it isn't, because these consoles are so simplistic. Now, I will say this. I didn't mention this on my Nintendo review, but technically speaking, I wouldn't go with an old school power supply. Maybe get a second-hand or an aftermarket one, because power supplies wear down over time. This isn't really an issue with the Nintendo Entertainment System, but if you're going to be using this console for the next 20 or 30 years, it's not known how much these power supplies break down over time, but I don't hear much about them breaking down, but just on the safe side, maybe consider getting an aftermarket power supply. You should definitely get an aftermarket AV cable, because the ones I got were all frayed and broken. So I had to replace those, but they're super cheap, but £5 at most. Not too big of an issue. Next, of course, you have your console. So what about the controllers? So here are the controllers. Now, for many people, these controllers are hit and miss. Some people hate them. Me personally, I think they're lovely. One thing to mention though, I don't know if you can see this, but the joystick actually wears down over time. So when it comes to Nintendo 64 console collections, unless you're a collector, don't use the original joysticks. You can buy third-party joysticks, but they vary drastically. Some are great, most are complete garbage. I would suggest get yourself the Hyperkin controller. It's slightly different, a tiny bit bigger and slightly heavier, but the joystick is superb. Now, if you don't want to get a Hyperkin controller, because these are a little on the expensive side, you can replace this joystick. It's very easy, but it does require you to take apart the controller. So there's lots of different options, so just whatever you're really comfortable with, just research that. But case in point, unless you're buying a brand new boxed Nintendo 64 controller, these joysticks will wear out crazy fast. Mine was barely used, and you can see it's already becoming unstable. The dead zone is completely off. So yeah. Now we have controllers, we have a console, and now let's talk about the games. Now, if you're a collector, now these are just a handful of my games, I have more over there, but if you're a collector, sure, get the game cartridges, they're fine. Just be aware there is some aftermarket cartridges that are convincingly real, so there is an issue of scamming when collecting Nintendo 64 games, but as long as you just use your common sense, you should be fine. However, if you're not a collector and you just want to play these games on original hardware, I'll be 100% honest with you, don't buy the cartridges. Instead, get yourself a EverDrive and then download the games online. Now, I have an EverDrive. I've already reviewed the Crits EverDrive for the Nintendo Entertainment System. It's brilliant. I love it. However, there's one available for the Nintendo 64. You can get that. There is a cheaper version called I think it's the N64 ED. I'll show a picture of it on screen maybe, just to give you an idea what it looks like. This video is not sponsored and I haven't tried them out, but from what I've heard some good reviews about them. The EverDrive ED or the N64 ED is cheaper, but it doesn't run particularly well, at least from what I've heard, but it is compatible with all regions. Now, I don't have it here to review, but even though I don't have it, I'm still going to endorse it because the reality of it is N64 game collecting has gone into a bit of a crisis at the moment where these games are worth. Now, I got mine at a very good value. I got GoldenEye for about £10. I got this for about £3 in a bundle with multiple games. Banjo-Kazooie I've seen go online for about £30. And then there's another game. So let me show you this one. This is Super Mario 64. It's a very popular game. I believe this came bundled with the original Nintendo 64. But this is the sort of absurdity. Now, I'm all an advocate for free and proper pricing. Not free pricing, Jesus. Proper pricing. But this is an area where I really just can't endorse this. I mentioned at the start that some Nintendo 64 games are worth more than the console itself. I'm not even joking. There is copies of Super Mario 64 that are being sold more than both the console, a power supply, and 2 controllers combined. Now, I understand certain games are rarer than others, but this is just borderline a scam. If you're buying Nintendo 64 games, at least until this passes over. Now, this video was made in the end of 2023, so maybe this issue might be fixed in the future if you're watching this a few years down the line, but as of right now, most of these games are not worth what people are selling them for. Some people say, oh, well, it's my childhood, so of course Mario 64 is worth 30 or 40. And Jesus, I've even seen some people sell it for £50. I do not care how revolutionary. I know this is going to sound very patronizing. This might sound off, but I fully stand by this statement. I do not care how much nostalgia you have for this game. This game is not worth £50. This game is not worth £60, and this game is not worth £70. Yes, I've actually seen people sell this game. Not in a box, mind you, just loose, in a cartridge. Now, I got mine for about £20, and to be honest, that's really hitting the upper limits for how much I'd pay for a game like this. Obviously, I did pay for it. Free shipping. I would try get some Nintendo 64 games in a bundle, like say 3 or 4 being in a lot. These games don't break. It's very rare for them to break. But just make sure if you do buy them, just clean off the contacts on the cartridges. Some games aren't worth nothing. Like, of course, Rad Racers isn't worth anything. It's probably one of the most common games on the N64. It's not as common as Super Mario 64. Then again, price and demand, will shift. But I still stand by the statement. Please don't pay for... If you can't buy any of these games, like Mario 64, I would pay no more than £12 for this game, because that's really all it's worth. There's so many copies of this game out there. Maybe in 100 years from now, sure, this game probably will be worth about £40 or £50, but as of right now, not a bloody chance. So, yeah, this is one of the very few instances where... And another thing too, as far as I'm aware, you can't actually buy these games, at least in their actual isolated ISO format. Nintendo doesn't sell them as far as I'm aware. These games are also not resold on newer consoles, so in many ways... Now, I don't condone piracy, but in many ways, considering you can't rebuy these games anymore, or they're just not the same as what they were on the original hardware, what can I say? I mean, your only option is to pirate them, so... And it's the only real way to play these games for a reasonable price. So look, that's really my rant over with. But case in point, look, you're not going to have the FBI banging down your door because you pirated frickin' rad racers on your Nintendo 64. So, look, I just say pirate them. If you don't agree with piracy, then go ahead and buy the actual games. No one's stopping you, but just be aware of some of the very scummy practices that are out there, because some people price these games to an absurd level and they're just not worth it. So my honest buying goal, if you're interested, you're in the market for a Nintendo 64, get the console on its own. Just make sure it's been tested, although most of the time it will work. Just buy the console on its own and then maybe get a third-party power supply, third-party AV cables, and maybe get the Hyperkin controller. This controller is solid. It's really, really well built. No stick drifting of any kind. Or if you're into it, maybe you can, it doesn't require soldering, but you can take the original controller apart and replace this joystick. It's a one-time fix and it will work great. Some games require a, now where is my one? Oh, it's in here. Get yourself a, okay, here, I'm going to have to put the camera down for a second. Get yourself one of these. This is a memory card. Not very many games use this, but a handful of them do, and they're crazy cheap. You can get third-party ones for about, I got mine for about £8. You can get original ones, but they're not worth much either. Yeah, get yourself one of these because they're just super handy. Now, a handful of games also require the memory pack. This memory pack has not been replicated by third-party sources, so your only option is to get a vintage one. These vintage memory packs are ridiculously expensive. Well, I say ridiculous. They're about 30 to... I've seen them go for about 30 to £50. Some games absolutely require this memory pack. But, you know what doesn't require a memory pack? An EverDrive. So, again, in this instance, I might actually just suggest just get the EverDrive, because, it's £50 for the N64 ED, about £120 for the Crits EverDrive, so it's a little more, but if you're not really, if you're not too worried about emulation or things like that, the EverDrive ED is perfect as well. And it bypasses this. As far as I'm aware, you don't need the memory pack if you have the EverDrive. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure you don't, because the memory drive has, or the EverDrive has built-in memory. So yeah, this was a very, very long review, but you know what? I'm happy with it. It's a beautiful console. It has its issues, obviously, with the games and unethical business practices, but you know what? It's a beautiful console, and if you want to go ahead and play this console, I'd highly suggest it, because some of these games are awesome. I don't play it very much myself, but I know a lot of people do, and they love these games. So yeah, that's really my review of the N64. Beautiful console, beautiful games. Alright, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, and goodbye.